Oregon has a very real chance to land 5-star defensive back DJ Pickett.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch the show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, big day. Big day for Oregon's 2025 recruiting class. DJ Pickett, I have been told, is down to Oregon and Miami. Our old friend Mario Cristobal and the Ducks. LSU could be in the mix. Haven't really heard or seen any sort of buzz along those lines. It's probably going to come down to Oregon or Miami. There's something else about DJ Pickett to know. We're going to talk about Oregon's roster today and plenty of quarterback chatter as well. But one thing that Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider here at the network, who will be on Friday's show, reacting to his commitment one way or the other, told me earlier today is that his recruitment is not going to stop after his commitment. So if he chooses Oregon, great. That means Oregon is in a great position and is in the lead to land him. If he does not choose Oregon, decides to go to Miami, that recruitment is one that can be flipped. So would I like to see him pick Oregon? Yes. But will there still be a ways to go? Yeah, it's July. Early national signing window is in December. And there is going to be an effort, unlike Decorian Moore, for whoever doesn't get him to try and flip his commitment. Because Decorian Moore, when he committed to Oregon on the 4th of July, he said, my recruitment is done. It's over. You know, like Charles Barkley declaring the dunk contest over in 2016 between Aaron Gordon and Zach Levine. It's over. Or Kenny Smith, sorry. It's over, ladies and gentlemen. It's over. Yeah, it will not be over for DJ Pickett one way or the other. Like if he chooses Oregon, don't assume he could never flip. Like that's not what that's not what Brian is saying. And Brian, pretty well connected guy, especially down there in the state of Florida where DJ is from. So I think that's a fascinating component to all of this. But is this a player I'd like to see Oregon get? Yeah, I would, for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're going to land a top 5 class, these are the guys that you have to be able to get. Right now, you know, Oregon has had a string of recruiting success, whether you're talking Decorian Moore or Josiah Sharma or Dorian Brew, all the guys they've landed in the last couple of weeks. These are the commitments you have to win if you want to be able to say by the end of the 2025 recruiting cycle, yeah, Oregon has pulled in its second straight top 5 class. I think to do that, they'd have to land either DJ Pickett or Trey McNutt, who is committing on Friday, 5-star safety out of the state of Ohio. But the other reason that I'd like to see at least one of these guys choose Oregon is because of the positions that they play. So Pickett is a guy that, along with, frankly, any 5-star, you have an expectation or a goal, I think, as a fan, for him to play right away as a true freshman. These are guys who won't just have that opportunity because of their talent, but because of the position group that they're coming into. After this year, Oregon is going to lose Brandon Johnson at nickel, Tysheem Johnson at safety, Kobe Savage at safety. Like, those are 3 of Oregon's projected, at least for me, starting defensive backs. And you're going to lose Jabbar Muhammad to the NFL. Jalil Florence, we'll see. We'll see. Nico Reed, I believe, is done after this year. Florence could have another year of eligibility, but if he has a great season, maybe he decides to go to the NFL. I think he leans more toward coming back for his senior year. But again, if he goes out and he balls the way that he's capable of, and I've been a Jalil Florence fan for a long time, and he has an all-conference caliber year, then yeah, maybe he does decide to go to the NFL. Like, you are going to be looking at an incredibly new secondary. Now, there are some other young pieces from past recruiting classes that Oregon has. You talk about guys like Tyler Turner or Aaron Flowers in the secondary, Peyton Woodyard on the back end of the defense as well. You look at a guy like Roderick Pleasant, who has tremendous speed. I think he has one of the highest speed ratings, maybe the highest speed rating in EA College Football 25, which I've played for 2 minutes. I led one drive down the field with Oregon's offense. I was literally jumping for joy when the Harley came out onto the field. I was so excited. It was amazing. I think the game rocks. I can't wait to play it and do nothing else with my life for a 48-hour period. But, well, let's be real. It's going to go well beyond that. But I think that for Oregon's secondary, they need to have as many bodies, as many possibilities for future plans at every position as they can. And Pickett, I think, is a guy that probably projects as a corner, but Brian has talked on this show how he has maybe a little positional versatility and could play elsewhere, but I'm just looking for secondary bodies here. When you're going to lose that many guys, I think that's a really, really important position for Oregon to recruit. And they've picked up a couple names, guys like Brandon Finney, who's a 4-star, really, really good-looking outside corner prospect for the Ducks. I think he reminds me a little bit of Christian Gonzalez with the way that, he's got good cover skills and definitely plays that boundary corner position really well. I like where, Oregon has recruited this position. I think they can add just more names. And, yeah, transfers are always available. I always wonder how reliable bringing in all conference caliber players from the transfer portal is. Like, sometimes guys come in and they are that good, but are they always going to be available? Are you always going to get the guys that you most want at that position? I think Oregon so far has been able to get whatever they wanted out of the transfer portal, whether that's starting quarterback, running back, receivers. They've done very well. They've done very well. In the event, though, that the transfer portal cycle, which is still young and has some unknown elements to it in terms of its long-term projection and the cycle of players or in the quality of players that go into the portal every year, having that fallback option of, there are a lot of really, really talented players in Oregon secondary in their recruiting class, I think is a great thing. With regards to DJ Pickett, Steve Wiltfong, and my guy Max Torres over at On3, they have both logged predictions for Oregon to land DJ Pickett. Hey, I'm here for it. I'm completely and totally down. I've also heard that Miami is not exactly backing off on the recruitment. Like, this feels like a true 50-50, kind of could go either way. But Wiltfong and Max both feel really, really good about Oregon's chances. Wiltfong also said recently, again, he works for On3, that he's 70% Oregon, 30% Texas A&M for Trey McNutt. That's the other 5-star defensive back. He's committing on Friday, and we'll have a preview of that recruitment on Friday's show. But a couple of big names upcoming here for Oregon's 2025 class. If they want to keep top 5 status, they have to get at least one of these guys, or else someone, would have a pretty good opportunity, I think, to pass them. But certainly if they get one of these guys, gosh, you re-into the discussion of can they get towards that number 1 class. Ohio State has it right now, and Georgia and Alabama right in front of Oregon, but the Ducks are right there with the players that they're recruiting. DJ Pickett, first guy to watch out there. Oregon's roster in 2024, ridiculously good. One of the 5 to 10 best in all of college football. Where does it stack up for all-time great Oregon rosters? Just how good is this upcoming team? I'll talk about that next. First, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. The good news is that FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets any time that I am in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. If you want to bet the Open Championship, which is starting this weekend over across the pond, you can do that. If you want to bet Major League Baseball, you can do that. The All-Star Game, season bets for Oregon, they're all there. Dillon Gabriel Heisman odds, which I've talked about this week, and everyone has uniform agreement, of course. And the win total, the conference title, everything is there. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I could argue second segment sips are even more important because I'm moving around doing all sorts of stuff here in Dallas. It's been a fun week. It's been a fun week. And before I get to the roster discussion, Kirby Smart was asked, I don't even know if he was asked or if it just kind of came up as he was giving an answer to another question. But he mentioned that recently he had the opportunity to meet Phil Knight and talk to him about Nike and building it. He was asked, in the context of program development. And he kind of made a joking jab. It wasn't anything malicious at Dan Lanning. And he said, yeah, I wish I could get some of that NIL that Phil Knight's given up to Dan Lanning at Oregon. And I kind of went, oh, wow. And then he was asked about it again later in a presser, and I was in the room for both of those questions. And now he was asked about Georgia's NIL situation, which is certainly not bad. He said, no, it's good. I feel like we're in a good spot. I was kind of curious because Oregon's NIL collective is notably well-funded. Is it number one in the country? By official metrics that I've seen, the answer to that question is no, it's not. I just think the Nike connection kind of makes it an easy, it kind of low-hanging fruit for a remark like that. And again, I don't think he meant anything terrible by it or whatnot, but I was not expecting to hear anything about Oregon and Dan Lanning at SEC Media Days. And then Kirby brought it up. I thought it was pretty funny. But anyway, let's hop into the mailbag now. YouTube comments, or X, formerly known as Twitter. You ask your question over there. You get it answered here on the show. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks as well, go join the flock over at Subtext and become a Locked On Ducks insider. That link in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show. This question came in from CW, not the TV network, just CW. What's up, man? Every day, or as you know. Well, now I know. Thank you. Appreciate it. Question for you. Realistically, how much better is this roster than 2010, 2012, 2014 teams? Hopes are really high this year, but I'm wondering how you think they would stack up against these teams. You may have already answered this question. I missed it, but thought I would ask. No, not specifically, nor recently have I addressed such a thing. So the 2010 team went to the national championship. 14, national championship. 2012, probably the best Oregon team to not make a national championship. That's the only year that Oregon had both Chip Kelly and Marcus Mariota. I think in the trenches, you'd see a vast difference between the 2024 team and the 2010 and 2012 teams. Now, by 2014, I think there were more NFL caliber offensive linemen on that Oregon roster, but Chip recruited a mold of offensive linemen who were smaller, more nimble, could pull out onto the edge, but we're not necessarily, Big Ten, SEC size, strength, physicality. And it worked, of course, incredibly well for a system. Ran into a hurdle in the national championship game. That hurdle was, of course, Nick Fairley, or Stanford teams could give Chip Kelly teams fits from time to time, though we also beat them soundly a couple of times. Just kind of depended on the day and the matchup, like a lot of things in college sports. But if I had to put this Oregon roster up against any of them, I'd say it's definitely above the 2010 team, pretty sizably. I just think the number of, a great way that I think is a good way, or a great way, to analyze how good a roster is. How many NFL players do you have on it? That 2010 Oregon team had a couple NFL caliber guys, right? LaMichael and Kenyon both got into the league. None of the receivers made it anywhere. I think Jeff Mail was on some teams and rosters and practice squads and whatnot. And Colt Lyerla wasn't on that team just yet. I think he got there in 2011, was a major player in 2012. I'm out of my years off on that. And, you got a couple good players in the secondary. Like Cliff Harris, if he'd been able to stay on the straight and narrow, I think would have been an NFL caliber corner. But that's kind of it. I go up and down this Oregon roster in 2024 compared to that 2010 team and say, yeah, I think this roster has a lot more NFL talent. You got T. Ferg at tight end. You got Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson at wide receiver. I think at quarterback, Gabriel, from his numbers, certainly an upgrade over Darren Thomas. I'm a Darren Thomas stan and think that he is great. Could Gabriel have done what Darren Thomas did with that team then? Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to talk more about Gabriel again later on today's show. But I think stylistically there are some similarities. I think this defense is just much, much better. Much, much better. But I think the offensive line is much better as well. That offensive line got pushed around by that Auburn team. I don't think this offensive line has that. You have two NFL caliber offensive tackles, and you just didn't have that back then. So I think from the 2010 and the 2012 teams as well, obviously the 2012 and 2014, you had Marcus, so that's an upgrade, but I think almost every other position group on average is superior to what it was then. Maybe not every single one. Like, is there a return man / utility guy as good as DeAnthony Thomas on this year's Oregon team? No, because I don't think we're ever going to see one that is better. Or if you were to look at, I think the trenches is the biggest difference. And that 2014 team is probably the best defensive line Oregon's ever seen. I've mentioned this before, and I continue to believe that this is the best defensive line Oregon has had since then. And you might say, well, what about the Kayvon Thibodeau years? Kayvon Thibodeau on those defensive lines was the guy, and at times it felt like the only guy. You think about the last time Oregon played Ohio State. Thibodeau was injured, didn't play. It's one of the reasons I did not think Oregon was going to win the game. And then, of course, they did, and it was fantastically awesome. Oregon could not get a lick of pressure on that in that Ohio State game. C.J. Stroud threw for 485 yards, not just because Oregon's secondary was getting beat a little bit in a couple of spots. C.J. Stroud had too much time to throw. This defensive line has a much greater propensity to cause havoc, and they're not entirely dependent on one guy. And I think they're so non-dependent. Like, of the 4 teams you're listing, which are probably the best Oregon teams in the last 15 years or so, I mean, 2023's was also very, very good. There was just that one team they couldn't get by. But if you look at those 3 teams and this team, the difference on the defensive line is there isn't just one guy who can be a game wrecker. Like, Deion Jordan was on that 2012 team, I'm pretty sure. He was really, really good. But who else could be a big presence like that along the defensive line? I think you can look at Derek Harmon, the Michigan State transfer, Jamari Caldwell, all-conference performer at Houston, that's a Big 12 team now, got to remember. Jordan Birch, former 5-star. And then I love the edge group. Like, you just didn't have this sort of depth of high-end playmaking talent on those teams. Like, even the 2014 team, those are the 2 best defensive linemen. Like, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead, they would both start on this year's defensive line. But would any of the other guys? There were some good players on that team. Like Tony Washington, good player. Would probably be a rotation guy on this year's defensive line. Like, he'd be in the mix, but would he be a bona fide starter? Would he be one of the best players on the defensive line? No, I don't think so. And I think that's the biggest difference, is Lanning has brought that SEC mindset of winning first and foremost in the trenches with your defensive line to this unit, because Harmon is a big-time addition. Caldwell, really good player. Birch, we know what he is. That guy's a stud. And then that group of edge guys, I think, are going to combine for at least 8 to 10 sacks this year amongst the 3 of them. And don't forget about Amarion Winston, because that's a guy who's going to be on the field a good amount for Oregon this year as well. I don't think he's the pass rusher that any of the other 3 can be, but Mateo, Blake Purchase, Tatum Tuioti, I think those guys combine for at least, well, I'll call it 9. I think they combine for at least 9 sacks. On average, they have 3 each by the time this year comes to a close, because I think their talent is immense. They played as true freshmen. They looked really good. Their numbers were solid. Their PFF grades were okay. And I think that making a year 1 to year 2 jump is going to be a real thing for all of them. So can this roster be better than all of those rosters, top to bottom? Yes, absolutely. And then you bring in a quarterback in Dillon Gabriel, who is wildly experienced, is going to be productive, and is the preseason Heisman favorite right now. I think that's a touch high. Like, he should be in the top 10. You can argue for the top 5, like preseason favorite. Like, okay, if I'm wrong on that, great. That'd be fantastic news. But I think that the team around him is going to be among the best he has ever had, probably the best he's ever had. Like, last year's Oklahoma team was good. Like, beating Texas, not a small thing. But they should not have lost to Kansas, and they should not have lost to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State was not a very good football team. So he was on a good team last year. I think Gabriel's on a great team this year, and is in an offense that really, really suits his skill set. So I think you're going to get a lot out of the quarterback position. I think the balance, overall talent level and depth is greater than we have ever seen at Oregon, and it'll just come down to going out and executing on the field. And yeah, Oregon could have done it last year. They had a good enough team. They had a good enough quarterback. Just didn't execute in the Pac-12 championship game. That's all it came down to. And I think it's that sort of season again. There aren't really any major glaring questions for this Oregon team. And they have NFL players all over the field on both sides of the ball. Love the question. Keep them coming. Question came in about Dillon Gabriel. Many questions have come in about Dillon Gabriel recently. What's the best comp for him? Talk about that next. So a question came in about Dillon Gabriel, of which I have many thoughts. This one came from Aaron. Question: if you were to make a comparison, would you say Dillon Gabriel is more like Vernon Adams Jr. or Jeremiah Masoli? And part two, how would you rank the three? So when Gabriel first transferred to Oregon, I'd watched him play a good amount at Oklahoma, and I watched more of his film and highlights and whatnot. And my first take, gut instinct, was a Masoli type. Not in that he's going to run over a safety who's 200 pounds the way Masoli did against Oklahoma State and against Oregon State, of course, in the Civil War in 2009. But just stylistically, smaller guy, good arm, accurate, moves well, will take off and run. And certainly Gabriel does take off and run. So that's kind of where my head went to. Then last week, I had Ryan Winter on the show, who is a fantastic guest. And when we had this conversation, he brought up the Vernon Adams comparison because he said, Gabriel will take off and he'll move out of the pocket, but he moves to throw more. And I think I like that comp a lot better, or I thought that I liked that comp a lot better. I thought about it for a while, and I think he's right. And certainly there are similarities between those guys because they will take off and run. But Vernon Adams, I loved Vernon Adams. I was a huge Vernon Adams fan. Hill, I will die on from now until the end of time. If Vernon Adams doesn't get hurt against Eastern Washington, that Oregon team makes the playoff. That roster was still really good. DeForest Buckner was the Defensive Player of the Year in the Pac-12. They went 9-3, and they would have gone 11-1 because they lost to Washington State and Utah because Vernon Adams wasn't able to play. And they would not that would not have been the case. The offenses were severely limited, and they didn't have a good backup quarterback situation. So I've always been a big Vernon Adams fan. And Vernon Adams, like Gabriel, not the biggest guy, mobile. I think Gabriel runs a little bit more. Vernon Adams wasn't really someone who had designed quarterback runs as a part of the game plans. Like, he kept it on the read option every now and then of course, got hurt doing so in the Alamo Bowl against TCU. But it's not as much a feature of his game as it is for Dillon Gabriel. So in that sense, I think he can be a tad more dynamic with what Will Stein is able to do offensively with the play calls. But I liked what Ryan said a lot about he moves to throw, which is a Russell Wilson sort of quality from when Russell Wilson was actually good, not whatever became of him when he got to Denver. And when you watch Gabriel, he's got a great deep ball. He's tremendously accurate. I think he and Evan Stewart, just like in the spring game, are going to link up for some big shots this year. Because when he gets outside the pocket, he does an exceptional job of throwing the ball downfield with accuracy. And, you see a guy that completes almost 70% of his passes last year. I expect him to hit 70% this year with the Ducks. I mean, Bo Nix set the NCAA record last year. It was at 77.5%. It was going, back and forth between, he's under, he's over in the Fiesta Bowl against Liberty. But I don't expect Gabriel to be at 77%. But should he be in the 71, 72 range? Yeah, last 2 years, Oregon quarterbacks have been over 70%, which have been records. And yeah, Bo Nix was exceptional. I think that Gabriel's ability to move and throw on the move with the weapons that he's got gives him the opportunity to continue to excel with those skill sets as he has. Because you see a high completion percentage like Bo Nix, and people think, he's just dinking and dunking all the time. Gabriel pushes the ball down the field. He's got the arm to do it. He's got the accuracy. And he's got the mobility to keep plays alive and get a completion where some guys might have to just throw the ball away. He's also, and I think Ryan pointed this out, he's a little bit stronger than people realize. Like, he can be a tougher guy to tackle than you would think. He's got that LaMichael James quality where he's shorter, but he's got the low center of gravity, and guys can be hard to bring down that are able to maximize that trait. So, yeah, I like the Vernon Adams Jr. How would I rank all three? Oh, gosh. like I haven't seen, like I have an idea of what Dillon Gabriel will be in this Oregon offense. And statistically, let me pull up Vernon Adams' stats real quick. Statistically, Gabriel's probably going to wind up with the best numbers. Like Vernon Adams was 65% completion, and he threw for about 264 yards a game in the 10 games that he played, 26 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Gabriel will probably wind up with the best numbers. I mean, he threw 6 interceptions in 12 games last year. I bet you he's around that number in 12, 13 games or 14, however many Oregon plays this year, this season. Like, let's just, project over the course of a 12-game year. Last year, Gabriel was 3,600 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and he ran for 12 touchdowns. With the weapons he's got this year and the offensive line he had a really good offensive line last year at Oklahoma. I'd say he's probably around 4,000 yards passing, mid-30s, probably for touchdowns passing. I bet his rushing touchdowns come down. It's probably under 10 just because Oregon, the last couple of years, quarterbacks running for touchdown, or Bo Nix running for touchdowns has been on the quarterback sneak. So I think a lot more of those goal line carries might go to running backs for Will Stein and company, but certainly I hope they utilize Dillon Gabriel's legs because it's a real asset to him. Even though I really liked Masoli as well, I definitely put Masoli third. I'd probably, man. Like I'll go with Gabriel first. I'll go with Gabriel first and Vernon Adams second. I think the gap between those two is closer than the gap between Vernon Adams and Masoli. Like VA was, there was a whole thing with a late arrival of Vernon Adams and a math test to get eligible. I don't even remember all the details of it. But Vernon Adams, to this day, throws the best deep ball of any Oregon quarterback I have seen. And I forget the coach that gave the quote. It might have been Scott Frost. I could have that wrong in my memory bank, but there was a coach that said Vernon Adams throws the most accurate deep ball he's ever seen from an Oregon quarterback, and I fully agree with that. I mean, it was Michael Penix's level of accuracy pushing the ball down the field. And Gabriel, I think, has a similar sort of touch, but VA was really, really good. So I'll go Gabriel first. I also think Gabriel has a slightly more lively arm than Vernon Adams did and a little bit of a cleaner motion. And he also has a little bit more running to his game as a feature of what he brings to the quarterback position than Vernon Adams. But I love Vernon Adams. I was a big fan. But yeah, good question there. Last one here. Speaking of quarterback talk. This from Ben. So my mailbag question. I see the updated player rankings came out on 24/7. A lot of them made sense. However, I did have a question about Akili Smith Jr. He's ranked, I believe, 113th before the latest update and dropped all the way to 247th. Why would there be such a big drop in the off-season, preseason rankings? Is he going to need more development time than what Oregon thought? Would this mean Oregon really needs to find a second quarterback in the 2025 class? Thanks as always, go Ducks, Ben. So no, Oregon does not need another quarterback in 2025. There was a moment where it looked like they might be interested in Ty Hawkins, and I think that moment has faded. And I think there is good reason for that Oregon has plenty of quarterbacks going forward, as I've discussed many times before here on the show. I think that the drop is not something to worry about. And one thing I've noticed, a couple things. First of all, this is not, some conspiracy against Oregon recruits. Oregon is not the only school that has had recruits fall in the rankings. Oregon's also had recruits rise in the rankings. There are a lot of reasons as to why. One thing that I've noticed is guys that have been committed for a long time don't get the same consistent level of attention they had before they were committed, and that can lead to a drop in the rankings. But it might not be that Akili Smith Jr. did anything wrong, because he was at these Elite 11 camps all over the place, and by all reports, he was doing really well. And I think what can happen is guys who are not committed or who are not as locked into their commitment might get more attention from the scouting community and then rise up the ranks a little bit more. But I would not worry in the slightest, because Mateo Uiagalelei, for instance, and Aiden Breland is the latest example of this. They were 5-star recruits when Oregon got them verbally committed. By the time they signed, they'd lost a star in their 24/7 Sports composite ranking. They're the same guy. Like, it happens a lot in the NFL draft. You overthink the room. You go too in-depth on, thinking about this or thinking about that. There are a lot of factors that go into a particular recruitment and where a guy is ranked and why he's ranked there and who ranked him there and how much input that they're getting. There are a lot of factors. So unless a guy is really cratering, and I don't think that applies to Akili Smith Jr., I don't think it's anything to worry about. And the guy's still the same player. And he's still 6'3", 6'4", with a good arm and a clean motion, and of course a fantastic line of genetics to come from. But I think when Oregon fans see these sorts of things, it's easy to translate what happens in the NFL draft, which is a lot of times Oregon players get overlooked, like Justin Herbert, or the narrative around Kayvon Thibodeau or Penei Sewell wasn't this, that, and the other thing. And all of us Oregon fans were just sitting there going, yeah, this is all ridiculous. These guys are all studs. Lo and behold, they are all fantastic football players. So I don't think it's going to affect Oregon's recruiting in the quarterback position. I don't think that they need to add a quarterback. I don't think it affects his development or timeline or anything. He's still a really talented kid. He's going to have a bunch of weapons to throw the ball to and a great coaching staff by the time he gets to Oregon next year. So I think Oregon's all good. Keep the questions coming. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or if you want priority access, go join the flock over at Subtext. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.